Good morning. Today we are talking about centrists and independents and how I think the media misrepresents people who would identify themselves this way and kind of just general misunderstandings about what that means and how that affects how candidates try to get centrists and independents to vote for them. So let's start with talking about independents. Now, being independent is not necessarily like an official, it's not a third party, but it's sort of set up as something separate from Democrats or Republicans. And so I think the mistake or misconception is that independents are generally between Democrats and Republicans. That they're like, oh, well, I like some of this, I like some of that. When really it's, I don't like this, I don't like that, so I'm not going to associate myself with either. So when politicians try to get independent voters to vote for them, they will often set up their pitch as presenting themselves as like having their own values, but then also sort of having values of the other party. And to be specific, Democrats do this. Republicans do not do this. Republicans have never, that I can think of at least, been like, hey, right-leaning voters, I'm a Republican, but this is how I'm also like the Democrats. Like, that doesn't happen. That doesn't happen. But Democrats do it every single time, and it's infuriating. And it's infuriating because to an independent voter, you're offering them a combo of two options, both of which they dislike. Like, what you're as trying to appeal to them of like, hey, we're a mix of things. They don't like the things you are mixed with. That is a problem. That is why that doesn't work. And so to actually genuinely appeal to independent voters or to people who don't usually vote, you have to actually offer something different. And that doesn't mean that you are ingenuine and just use a talking point that you think they'll like, because that's like the number one thing that independent voters can detect is when you are bullshitting them. So like, that's why they're not gonna like just be loyal for no reason. You have to actually appeal to them and recognize what they are asking for and what they are explicitly rejecting by not identifying as either Democrat or Republican. And now let's talk about centrists, because I think this is actually even a bigger misconception. So when people talk about centrists or wanting to be centrist or valuing centrism, they are wrong. not to want to value that, but they are wrong with what they think is at the center of opinion in this country. And you can see that clearly because things like Medicare for All and the Green New Deal have majority support, which means one of two things. Either most of the country is far left, or Medicare for All and the Green New Deal are centrist positions. And so when you have most of the country in agreement that accessing healthcare is good and that the planet burning is bad, but those are not seen as centrists to elected national politicians, that there is so much disconnect that happens because of that, and so much mistrust that happens because of that. And just like there's like, what do you do if what is common sense to you is seen as radical to someone who is supposed to be representing you? And then, like, even with something as even more clear-cut as the federal minimum wage, which, again, is $7.25 an hour, the support for raising that to at least 15 is so high that even better example, the support for gun safety legislation is astronomically high. Like, zero risk from voters for a politician enacting that kind of change. And like there's like bribery from corporations involved in this, but there's so many examples of things that are so clear to so many people, that are central to the American people, that are basically dismissed by so many politicians. And it's like, they like to say that some of them like to say that they are centrist, like to say that they love bipartisanship, that they love, working across that goddamn aisle. But it's frustrating though, because, you'll cross that aisle to cut taxes for billionaires. You'll cross that aisle to reduce restrictions. What is it called? I think regulations is what I was trying to think of reducing like environmental protection regulations, so that like oil companies can do, whatever they want, and you just have to have an increased risk of cancer. Like, that's bipartisanship. That's what they can work together on. That is where they find common ground. That's why people don't like politics. To my point, being centrist is not being centrist for like the American people does not mean what it means to the Senate and Congress. Those are like worlds apart. They are two different things, which is a problem. And it's a problem for two reasons. One is that it leads into gaslighting, because you have most people, who are like, can't we all agree on this? Like, don't we all agree on, like, there should be certain things that we agree on, that we want and that we need? And then, you're called, like, fringe or extreme, or, like, you're not taken seriously. You can't get meetings with your senator. And, like, that's gaslighting. That's making you think that you are asking too much, that you are being unreasonable, when you are being perfectly reasonable, and you have, in fact, tens of millions or hundreds of millions of people who agree with you, and yet you're the one, left out in the cold. And the second problem with misunderstanding actual centrist opinion is that because of that disconnect, because it means two different things, the priorities become different. Like, it is explicitly not a priority for current, like, Democratic establishment politicians. It is not their priority to even vote on Medicare for all or parts of the Green New Deal. That it's like not even on their list of things to maybe do, because it's not central to them. It's mind-blowing. But those policy priorities are so different. You have a group of 500 or so people making decisions for 300 million or so people who are just have 98% of them just have this fundamentally different understanding of what priorities should be, and what common sense is, and what people actually want and support. And I mean, a lot of that comes from not understanding their voters, from not respecting their voters, but a lot of it also comes from taking bribes from fossil fuel corporations and pharmaceutical companies and insurance companies, that, like, if they feel that they are there because of those donations, and that they would not be there without those donations, they're going to keep those donations coming. That's obviously a problem. So I keep repeating that. That's a problem. What do we do about it? Okay. The problem comes down to who they are representing. Because if it is fringe for Blue Cross, Blue Shield, or Aetna to not need them, that is fringe for them. That is fringe for that corporation, for that industry. And if so, then that view of changing how we do healthcare access becomes fringe for the politician. Because as long as that industry or those types of industries become the reason that a representative is in office, that is where they take their cues from. But if you remove that relationship, if the voters are the reason that someone is in office and can be the reason that someone is out of office, then what is common sense and what is fringe for the voters starts to match what is common sense for the representative. And it is common sense for voters to have access to health care. It is common sense to not die from preventable causes. It is common sense that when your kid has a temperature of 104, you are able to take them to the hospital. You know the examples. That's common sense. And this is a corporate media problem too, because they also take money from corporations for ad revenue. And so we all know every other commercial is for some other drug for this or that. That influences what they talk about as what is common sense and what is not. And that's why independent media can cover things more accurately to how people actually feel, because they are responsive to actual people. So, centrism, independence, actually taking the time to care to learn what people actually care about, it would be indescribable to explain the difference that would make if our elected politicians actually understood that.